Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I will turn your attention next. I want to talk about the MMR vaccines, but I am looking at some of the comments that Cressida Dick made to Nick Ferrari earlier. Not so much the stuff about knife crime, but the stuff about what middle-class dinner parties. I don't know, there's a slight obsession with middle-class. Cocaine is far from a middle-class exclusive domain. But you know, my theory is that if you were really serious about clamping down on gang culture, you'd do one of two things. You'd either look properly at decriminalising drugs so that the profits are not confined to the criminal fraternity, or you'd go after the customers with as much rigour as you go after the dealers, and that would involve routinely upending people, falling out of nightclubs on the King's Road at 4 o'clock on a Sunday morning, holding them up by the ankles and see what falls out of their pockets. And if white powder that turns out to be cocaine falls out of their pockets, come down on them like a ton of bricks, instead of the kid that might have sold it to them from South London, who's living a life of utterly unrecognisable poverty and squalor compared to the hooray who's getting high on his supply. Just a thought. So I find myself actually nodding along with Cressida Dick on that one. I think there is something to be said for coming down. If you're not going to decriminalise, then you have to look at who gets criminalised. And it is fair to report, I suspect, that there will be plenty of people sitting on both sides of the House of Commons who have had experience of taking Class A drugs, but who, whenever the issue appears in the news, find themselves somehow able to forget all about that and speak very passionately about the punishments that should be visited upon those who sell them. And I mean the poor end of the selling market, although there are profits to be made. The really big money, of course, is made by people who will never be seen anywhere near a street deal or a county line. But we digress, because I love this story. I mean, I love it and I hate it, because it's been around almost as long as I've been doing this job, and it really took me by surprise the first few times we spoke about it. Doctors are not infallible, all right? Experts are sometimes wrong. Thomas Kuhn's theory of science, the history of science, is really powerful because it explains how a paradigm can shift. So a scientific paradigm, as I understand it, and I stress it's 30 years since I did this at college, almost. A paradigm is the best available explanation for the observable evidence. This is my understanding of it. So, for example, Einstein's theory of relativity was breathtaking in its beauty and its brilliance, but it also subsequently turned out to be wrong. As more evidence emerged, so Einstein's theory of relativity did not account for all of the things that emerged after he published his theory. I think it evolves into quantum theory, doesn't it, or something like that, but I'm on really, really thin ice now. Don't phone in to correct me if I've got that wrong. Just give me the benefit of the doubt. The whole point here is it's the best available explanation for the observable evidence, but that doesn't mean that it's copper-bottomed 100% demonstrably true quite often. Drugs would be similar. You know, this is the best available treatment for the condition that you have. But that doesn't mean it will always be the best available treatment for the condition that you have. Something else might be invented or discovered that turns out to be a better treatment for the condition that you have. So thank you to Gary, who's pointed out it was indeed someone who routinely pollutes these airwaves, who got on board the Charlie Gard story at Great Ormond Street and tried to turn that into an opportunity for self-promotion by turning up at Great Ormond Street with a film crew. So that's where it leads ultimately, this idea that some tin pot fascist knows more about medicine than Great Ormond Street doctors do. And we saw that horribly highlighted during the tragedy of Charlie Gard. The usual opportunistic liars and snake oil salesmen jumping on that particular bandwagon. But doctors make mistakes. White coat syndrome, is that what it's called, or something like that? I tend to lean a little bit towards the trusting. If a doctor tells me something, I kind of think that must be the case. And I'm changing, not least because I'm nowhere near ready to tell you all about it yet, but 2018 for me and my family was an incredibly difficult year at home. I mean, outside of the work environment where everything went nuts in a good way, at home, our dealings with the NHS, all of the individuals were magnificent and wonderful, but there were times when we were contemplating really bleak possibilities, and we turned out to have been misinformed on the bleakest one of all. So that's what I mean by white coat syndrome. If we hadn't pushed and pressed and asked more questions and sought other opinions, we could have ended up making some really quite terrible mistakes in the context of our family. So doctors are not infallible. No doctor would claim to be, right? But there has to be a consensus or a paradigm. There has to be something upon which, when an overwhelming majority of qualified analysts agree, then society has to treat that as truth. And the two areas in which all of the foundations for the collapse of our rules-based Western democracies could turn out to hinge, weirdly go back to MMR and climate science. Long before Donald Trump was spoken of as a potential president of America, and long before Brexit ceased to be confined to the wet dreams of crypto-fascists and Little Englanders, and long before Vladimir Putin realized that social media was essentially an undetonated bomb at the heart of our freedoms and democracies, which he took great delight in lighting the fuse of, climate change and MMR were the things. So much so that recent research showed that tweets about MMR to anti-vaccine tweeters were disproportionately represented in Russia. Massive numbers of so-called troll factories in Russia tweeting about anti-vax. And why wouldn't you? We don't really get this notion of enmity, those of us on my side of politics. We don't understand how you can think Emmanuel Macron is your enemy when he's telling you the truth and Brexiters are lying. Ian Duncan Smith on the telly this morning claiming that all the polls show that everybody just wants to leave, even those who voted Remain. Interviewer at Bloomberg missing a bit of a trick by not saying, what polls are those, Mr. Duncan Donuts? So you've got now people, you'd rather be lied to by an Englishman than told the truth by a Frenchman. That's fine. But I can't quite get my head around that notion of we must be enemies because of where you were born, or we must be enemies because of where you're from. Vladimir Putin's defense of his position in Russia completely depends upon a siege mentality, not least because Western freedoms and values in a pre-Brexit, pre-Trump world would have been the catalyst for the collapse of Putin's regime. When the Russian people saw what freedom and democracy can deliver, they would eventually have sent him the way of his Ukrainian crony, which is why he's working so hard to undermine traditional Western freedoms and democracies. And he's being incredibly successful. He's still winning. Look at the White House, look at Brexit. But he also does it on MMR. And it took me a while to work out why. It's about anything that weakens us. I know this sounds a little bit apocalyptic, but you don't have to be very old to remember the Cold War. You know, you don't have to be very old to remember when the West and the East were enemies just because ... the Bay of Pigs. You don't, pre-Gorbachev politics, pre-Reagan and Gorbachev, it was very helpful, presumably, for both Russia and American leaders to have this constant enemy. It's Orwellian, isn't it? It's the constant enemy that is there, and therefore you can justify almost any political decision by saying it's part of the resistance of the enemy. So you shouldn't be shocked. I shouldn't be shocked. We shouldn't be shocked that the Russian government disseminates and spreads propaganda designed to make us weaker. And in this case, it's designed to reintroduce measles to the public space.
Okay, well, deciding when or even whether to vaccinate our children is one of the responsibilities of parenthood, of course, and many people do turn to sites like Facebook for advice. Anyone who does will find plenty of information from reliable sources, but they will also come across claims that approved vaccinations can be harmful, many of which seem to be based on very little science, if any at all. Now, MPs worried about public health have ordered an inquiry into how this is allowed to happen. Facebook says it already reduces the prominence of potentially misleading articles.
Go online and search for information about vaccinations, and while you'll find stories and videos on the benefits, you'll also find rather a lot of false claims about the dangers and potential side effects. Such anti-vaccine sentiment on social media is causing a real worry across the medical spectrum. Uptake of childhood vaccines in the UK have declined every year for the last 5 years, despite no scientific evidence they cause any harm. Michelle Bresnahan's 16-year-old son died from meningitis B in 2010. A vaccination wasn't available to Ryan before he died, but his mother now insists every parent should get their child immunised.
that there is the option to protect your children. And certainly with meningitis B, we didn't have that option. So my only message would be, I wish I had. I wish I could have done it. And then Ryan would have stood an 80% chance of still being here.
So concerned about the prevalence of misinformation on the internet, ITV News has learnt that the All-Parliamentary Group on Vaccinations in Westminster will launch an inquiry into it in May.
This is the sort of thing that the parliamentary group is worried about. If I type in vaccine into Facebook, it takes me to a number of forums that MPs say are scaremongering because they say they're making false claims. Facebook are under huge pressure to do something, and they do say that they remove any article that is misleading. But tonight they've admitted to us there is much more to do, and they will announce an update on that shortly.
A recent report found that half of parents with a child under 5 said they'd been exposed to negative messages about vaccines on social media, with more than a quarter wrongly believing it was possible to have too many vaccinations, and a fifth still thought the MMR jab was likely to cause side effects. And it's not just here. Cases of measles are at a 20-year high in Europe, and in America the anti-vaccine movement is growing.
In populist movements, so in Italy and we could argue in the United States under President Trump, there has been an increase in political talk about anti-vaccination, really putting some political heft by it. And we know that scientists and medics, doctors in all of those countries are very concerned indeed.
It's vaccinations that help beat infectious diseases. The question is, do we want to return to a world where we're vulnerable to them again? Emily Morgan, News at 10.
And it's worked. So as I prepare to talk to you about a story, some research from Denmark, and I don't think you can derive causation from correlation on this one, but it certainly does the opposite job. It shows that there is a lower incidence of autism among children who've had the MMR vaccine. That doesn't mean that the MMR vaccine necessarily lowers the likelihood of autism, but it proves pretty conclusively that it doesn't increase it, which was the claim and still is the claim of the anti-vaxxers, as they like to be called. But what's astonishing about this is how successful it has been. So I can tell you now that UNICEF is profoundly worried about a global surge in measles. They say the real infection is misinformation. Here's the phrase that they publish themselves, the United Nations Children's Fund, reporting on an alarming spike in the disease. Global progress in the fight against measles eroded last year, and vaccine hesitancy is among the reasons, according to a report released Friday, that's Friday of last week, by the United Nations Children's Fund. 98% of countries have reported an uptick in measles cases. Ukraine, the Philippines and Brazil had the largest increases. Hasn't Brazil just elected a far-right leader as well? It has, hasn't it? Ukraine, of course, remains a focus of Putin propaganda. The Philippines, haven't they got a far-right leader as well? Haven't the Philippines got the bloke who says he's going to murder drug dealers single-handedly? Is that the Philippines? Is anyone going to help me out here before I embarrass myself? That's quite interesting, isn't it? So UNICEF's executive director says this is a wake-up call. We have a safe, effective and inexpensive vaccine against a highly contagious disease. There are incidences of it rising in America. A Republican lawmaker has said that mandatory vaccination is somehow communist. There you go. You don't need to check where they stand on the is Donald Trump wonderful scale. 900 people have died in Madagascar as a result of a measles outbreak. They've actually died. And paediatric staff's response to anti-vaxxers after a measles outbreak is very pithy. Vaccines cause adults, i.e. you will grow up to be an adult if you're vaccinated. This is a counter to the argument that vaccines cause autism. Clark County in Washington, a known anti-vaccination hotspot, has seen more than 60 confirmed cases of measles since the beginning of this year. And most cases are affecting unvaccinated children younger than 10. No deaths reported yet, but one of 6 measles outbreaks currently being tracked by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in America. One's in Texas. State Representative Bill Zedler made headlines last week for claiming that measles is not killing people in America because of antibiotics and that kind of stuff. That's what you want. That's where you want your medical expertise coming from. Politicians who say antibiotics and that kind of stuff while claiming that vaccines are bad. unvaccinated French boy has brought measles to Costa Rica for the first time in 5 years. That was in February of this year. Facebook is considering hiding posts encouraging anti-vaccine ideas because, of course, it can actually kill. But there you go. That, for me, is the foundation stone of fake news. And what I'd really like to do with your help is work out why it worked. So if your child displays autism and someone comes along and says it's because of that rather than dumb luck, I think I get it. But when the scientific evidence is amassed on the other side, when the man who came up with the idea that there was a link between MMR and autism is discredited and disbarred from medical practice in this country, and you still persist in this belief, that's the bit I don't get. So in the context of MMR and autism, and the most compelling proof yet that there is no link between the two, I guess I'm asking you how fake news works. Not how it works. I know how it works. Why does it work? 0345 6060 973. So people you know who are so-called anti-vaxxers, give me a ring and tell me about them. I don't think, going to talk to you if you are an anti-vaxxer, because I don't really think that LBC is a platform that you should be allowed to employ to endanger the lives of innocent children. So we'll do it second-hand. If you're an ex-anti-vaxxer, I'll talk to you, but I wouldn't let anybody come on air and encourage child murder or child rape, so I'm not going to let anybody come on air and encourage child illnesses, child diseases, and potential child deaths as a result of things that science says are untrue, but you found a bloke on Facebook who says it's true, so that's how you've decided to lead your life and your children's choices. Almost takes us back to the last hour, doesn't it? And the importance of education as opposed to, oh, I don't like it, it's not normal. Here till 1, when Sheila, of course, will be taking over. The science on the MMR jab is clear. There is no link with autism. There never was. 90 to 99% of the world's medics agreed with that. A few didn't. And the chief among them, a chap called Andrew Wakefield, of course, published in The Lancet research that sought to establish a link and was subsequently utterly discredited. But it persists. There's some famous people in America that go down this line as well. My first question is why? 0345 6060 973. Where did it come from? Is it just this thing that underpins a lot of behaviour the rest of us find very odd? A deep desire to believe that bad things won't happen to you if you are properly prepared or if you behave different. It's like the denial of dumb luck. Saw it most powerfully after Madeleine McCann disappeared. And we sat here, I had this job at the time, I was quite new into it. I didn't get it. I thought, when someone's going through that hell, how could you be adding to their burdens? People queuing up to criticise, condemn and castigate Kate and Jerry McCann, and I didn't understand why in the very, very early days afterwards. And then, of course, it was, well, they left her on her own. That couldn't happen to me because I would never do that. So the charitable reading of some of the McCann's critics would be they're trying to convince themselves it couldn't happen to them. So if your child had autism, you'd be looking for a reason other than dumb luck. But if your child didn't have autism and you were buying into these lies, you'd be kidding yourself that you could somehow avoid... I don't know. You tell me. I'll shut up for a bit. James is in Nottingham. James, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
First time caller, sorry, a bit nervous.
No, it's only me.
So my point was that the reason it's become the anti-vaxxers have been so popular is because vaccines work so well. So people haven't seen things like measles forever because vaccines work, and then they get told that vaccines could be harmful for a different reason. So they think, I haven't seen measles for years and years, or ever, and therefore, if there's a possibility that something else could be wrong, I'm going to caution towards that. I'm not going to get measles because I've never seen it before, but I might get autism.
So you're looking, again, like me, you're looking for the slightly more charitable reading of the mindset that is profoundly dangerous. And it is... It's the evidence of what's at the end of our noses. I'm not frightened of measles, but I am frightened of autism. Therefore, I'm more susceptible to the person who tells me to go down that route than I am to the person whose route works.
Yeah, and I would say also, I mean, there's obviously been a very popular uptick in kind of organic, everything's got to be natural and things like that. And it's very easy to kind of look at, like, the ingredients of it. You've seen hundreds of Facebook posts of, I haven't,
actually. I do sometimes wonder whether I need to start another Facebook account that's a little bit more public-facing than mine. Because I'm all up for Twitter, but on Facebook I really do confine it to people I know offline. So I don't really see this stuff. I had one friend years ago, an old friend of my wife's, who was going down that path a little bit, but we were pretty scorched earth with her and said, if your children aren't vaccinated, we will never see you again. I don't think I've shocked James into silence. I think his phone line went south at the crucial moment. And obviously vaccinated children are less at risk than unvaccinated children are, but it undermines herd immunity completely. We may get James back if he's got something to add. If he feels he's done his bit, then we don't need to, because, we need all the phone lines. We've got all our phone lines busy at the moment. Liam is in Cambridge. Liam, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, just to your point that you made to James about you saying that you wouldn't speak to the people that had unvaccinated children. That's exactly what they...
I'd speak to them. I wouldn't let my children play with their children. And once you've reached that point, you're unlikely to be big buddies on the old social front for the foreseeable.
No, I understand completely. And that really is kind of one of the reasons that I called up. I had seen about Flat Earth and anti-vaxxers and wondered where these people are getting information from and where are they, how are they believing these things. And so I joined an anti-vaxxers group. They called themselves Vaccine Re-Education on
Okay,
on
be
Facebook.
careful on that, because they're not here to defend themselves against anything you subsequently say. So I don't need any detail. The fact that you joined a Facebook group dedicated to vaccine skepticism, or whatever you want to call it, that's more than enough knowledge to explore what you discovered when you got there.
That's fine. And so there's a lot of encouragement there for people to post on their personal pages a poll or a question about vaccines and to say, well, do you believe in vaccines or do you not? And
the only people that see it are people that are already in the choir.
Well, no, it's quite the opposite. So to begin with, these people are just going into the anti-vaccine kind of community, and they ask the question, and some of their friends and family will say, yes, I do believe in vaccines, and then they'll have 300 people saying, no, they don't, because these are from the anti-vaccine community. And then they'll go back onto the community page that only the anti-vaxxers will see, and all the encouragement is, see, these people are against you, these people believe in vaccines, they want to hurt your children, you need to not speak to them, and they're encouraged to remove them from their Facebook. They're
like a religious cult, like a cult,
exactly.
Cutting off contact with family.
To them in real life.
Oh boy!
And there are people in tears there saying, "Well, I haven't spoken to my mother in 3 years because she won't accept that anti-vaccine is a thing, and her mother hasn't cut her off. She refuses to speak to her mother until she turns around and says vaccines are wrong."
Oh my days! Now here's the thing: I wonder whether you can help me with this, because I don't know how much of our Brexit coverage you listen to, but I'm at great pains, increasingly, and I forevermore will be at pains to distinguish between the liars and the lied to. And it's not hard to see what was in it for the liars. They get, make a killing out of the collapse in the pound. They're heavily invested in emerging markets. They end up getting their own radio shows. There's all sorts of glittering prizes for the liars. The lied to, of course, are going to win precisely nothing. But when you come to anti-vaccines, I know that some dodgy online propagandists flog unregulated alternatives, but generally speaking, the site you were on, no one's actually making money out of it. Do you see what I mean? What's in it for the liars? What's in it for the protagonists rather than the followers, the leaders rather than the followers? Do you know?
So you don't see many leaders there. You don't see evidence.
But someone's pulling the strings. These things don't blow up by accident, do they?
No, I completely agree. But for some reason, they're under this impression that the whole medical industry is out to get them, and they think the bad guys are the pharmaceutical companies, which, sometimes there may be a point there.
And well, of course, so you only need to look at thalidomide, and actually there's a brilliant book by, I've got his business card in my wallet. Wait there, Liam, this is me being really professional. There's a brilliant book by Chris McGreal, the former Washington correspondent of The Guardian, about the opioid crisis in America, which is essentially sanctioned drug dealing. So the pharmaceutical companies, you're right, they're not by any stretch of the imagination infallible or perfect, but I can say that without thinking, I think I won't vaccinate my children against measles, mumps and rubella.
Exactly. And I'm one of, I've got 4 children and they're all vaccinated, and they have their vaccines whenever.
So what did you learn? What was your big takeaway from this group then? Just this sort of echo chambery, cultish.
To be honest.
Yeah, of course you did.
Because I'm looking at, and there are comments where they would say things like, oh, well, there's dead babies in the vaccines. And I thought, well, that must be nonsense. They're saying there's hundreds of thousands of dead babies. And so I looked up and I read from, the CDC in America and read the information. And, in the 60s, there
might
were
have been placentas or something like that. So they find a little nugget of truth and use it to spook people. I've just glanced at the clock. I'm late for the news. It's the only reason I'm moving on. Still don't get it. A little bit closer. Liam's helpful. But again, you try to imagine circumstances in which you would not vaccinate your own child. And we can't, because we're not nuts. And, of course, the Labour Party's ongoing problems with fairly rampant anti-Semitism in the ranks, notwithstanding, the Conservatives historically have a much bigger problem and historical association with racism. Here's the latest example. A council candidate in Harlow has resigned and even left the party with immediate effect. I deeply regret my remarks on social media, he says. At no point did I intend to cause any offence to the Muslim community. I have reflected on my comments and decided that I should step down as a local election candidate and resign the Conservative Party with immediate effect. If you're a young journalist looking for some scoops or some stories, go and have a look at the Racists for Rees-Mogg Twitter account, where many people who certainly profess to be either members of the Conservative Party or more, in this case this fellow who's stood down as a council candidate, are being routinely revealed to harbour vile views, which, of course, if they were from rank-and-file Labour members, they'd be in the Telegraph, the Times, the Express and the Sun every day. But the world being what it is, it's left to unpaid activists on Twitter. But if you're a young journalist looking for a story, especially on a local, get yourself plugged into the Racists 4, that's the number 4, Racists 4 Rees-Mogg Twitter account, and look at the work that they're doing in just going over the fan sites. Like if you were a right-wing journalist who didn't care about the truth, you'd be going over all of the Jeremy Corbyn fan sites looking for anti-Semitism and then linking it back to the leader, which, for the record, I think you're entitled to do, but only if you dedicate the same amount of time to going through the Racists for Rees-Mogg identified websites and linking them back to the person they would like to be leader. Just an exercise, an academic exercise, as indeed is this hour of the programme. It's an academic exercise in working out why people choose to believe damaging, dangerous things. In this case, we're looking at the Danish research that's found children who had the MMR vaccine were 7% less likely to be autistic than those who did not have the injection. Causation and correlation are not the same thing, but I think, and statisticians are welcome to correct me on this, but I think you can use that as evidence that the MMR vaccine doesn't cause autism. What you can't do without knowing more about the research is claim that the MMR vaccine diminishes the likelihood of autism. If you don't understand what I'm wanging on about, I'll give you the perfect example of causation and correlation not being linked, okay? People who drown are statistically more likely to have recently had an ice cream. People who drown are statistically more likely to have recently had an ice cream. Now, you can't derive from that having an ice cream makes you more likely to drown, even though it's statistically true. And you know why it's statistically true, you just have to think about it for a while. You got it yet? Have you got it yet? Yeah, because if you're at the seaside, you're more likely to have an ice cream, and if you're at the seaside, you're more likely to drown. So causation and correlation, not the same thing, but I think, until someone corrects me, that we can use this research to argue that MMR categorically and clearly doesn't cause autism. Siobhan's in Islington. Siobhan, what's going on? Why do people buy this stuff?
Personally, my own personal experience, because I have a son that has multiple seizures type epilepsy. He developed that at the age of 3. Up to that, he was a perfectly normal, healthy, running around little boy, and all of a sudden at the age of 3, I was told as a child I might not survive 6 months.
It's terrifying.
He has, thank God, and he's doing extremely
you search
well.
for answers, you search for anything.
Yeah, you do. You look for the answers, to the point that we were given a diagnosis in Great Ormond Street, and we kept going. I kept going. We met this wonderful professor, Professor John Cartier from France. I think he's retired now, and he changed around my son's drugs. And my son is now 26, and he has learning disabilities, but he's living a very good quality of life, if that makes sense. But
yes, of course it does.
Getting back to autism, I'm actually a paediatric nurse as well, and the reason what happens to people, as I said there, when you're given a diagnosis, and it's usually in around the age of 2 to 3 that your child is diagnosed, in around those ages, you start to see developmental delays and things like that.
Yes.
But also around that time, the MMR vaccine is also given as well.
Which is a coincidence, literally.
It is a coincidence,
as in
exactly,
the two
a
things
bit like what you were saying there.
coincide, but you derive a link because you want to.
You want to. You're looking for a reason.
Why do you want to?
Because every parent to have their children, they look at them. You've got great hopes for that child to live a normal, healthy child. You want your child to go into a good school and have a good education. Me personally, I was planning for him to go to private education.
I know.
Do my very best for him, you know.
Yes, of course.
And then you're told that's
you
never
still
gonna happen.
are doing your very best for him. It just looks a bit different from what you were expecting.
Exactly. You're told that's never going to happen. Your child needs special educational needs. So obviously you want to know why that's happened to your child, why your child. So you look for anything that could have caused it, and you look at the same time for anyone that can cure it with an answer.
And people, because I've read terrible things about children being told to drink bleach and things like that, but because we didn't ask Liam about this, who joined one of these Facebook groups out of curiosity and research, does it always go hand in hand with a claim that they can fix it? So they say autism caused it, but I can fix it, just send me money, and then you're back to kind of...
Yeah, I wouldn't know much about those Facebook groups because I wouldn't go onto them.
No, I know you wouldn't, but were you given the impression that...
No, I was given a very, very negative diagnosis from a professor in Great Ormond Street originally. And I was told my son might not survive 6 months.
But that was true. I mean, he did, and I'm very glad that he did, but it doesn't mean it was wrong to tell you that he might not.
Exactly. But what I'm saying with some parents, yes, they may well go abroad and start looking at different surgeons, or...
So somewhere down the line, someone will be making a few quid out of it.
To get this, to get it corrected.
And if you hadn't been a medical professional yourself, you can understand how people can end up being susceptible to those sort of tactics.
They're very vulnerable. Parents are very, very vulnerable.
But then what do you do if you want to make money out of it? If you have no conscience, you go for the most vulnerable people of all, don't you?
Exactly. Yeah, and they will do anything. If a parent is offered a cure for their child, they will cut their arm off to get that cure for their child.
I think you get your MMR at around 14 months, but of course, I mean, the fact that you might start displaying autistic traits a year later, people would reach for a link. And you do. A few people are telling me there is money in it, James. So they sell their anti-pharma oils, sugar pills, talks, seminars, documentaries, and similar. And I think, you know, oh dear, it's so obvious. It's all the same. This is why I'm beginning to go a bit bonkers, Siobhan. It's all the same. I bet. I'm not going to say. I need to look at the. InfoWars was selling supplements, weren't they? Selling brain juice. This idea that all the experts are wrong, and me with my website and my Twitter account and my Facebook page, I'm right. Send me money.
Yeah.
And I will help you.
Yeah, it's just attacking the vulnerable, really.
Always attack me. It's not unlike the idea that I pretend that grooming gangs aren't reported in the so-called mainstream media, and if you don't follow mainstream media, then you might believe me. And if I say, send me money, and I'll keep telling you stuff that is in the mainstream media while also telling you that it isn't in the mainstream media because they're trying to keep it all secret, you'll keep sending me money. It's a classic grift. I don't think the Russians are involved in that one, although if you wanted to look at who amplifies the Islamophobia that's routinely found on Twitter and elsewhere, not just in the accounts of recently resigned Conservative councillors in Harlow, you probably find Russian fingerprints on that as well. And I'm not going to lie to you, when I was first told about the possible source of a lot of this propaganda online, I thought it was nonsense. And also, it's very hard to tell when you're on social media to the degree that I am. It's very hard to tell who is a genuine, bona fide racist bigot and who is pretending to be in order to foment and amplify racist bigotries in America and in the United Kingdom. I'll tell you the weirdest thing when it comes to the Russian social media, bots, trolls, propaganda, whatever you want to call it. It was when the name of the female lawyer that had met with Donald Trump Jr. was in the public arena, and someone detailed her Twitter account. And someone, I think it was one of you, who just searched that with my Twitter, and she tweeted me about stuff I was doing with Bill Browder, the campaigner against Putin's kleptocracy. Make of that what you will, but at the time it kind of spooked me a bit. I don't know if this counts as breaking news, because it's been around for 47 minutes, but I missed it, and I apologise, because you expect me to bring you this kind of information. And don't shoot the messenger. I derive no pleasure whatsoever from telling you that BMW board member Peter Schwarzenbauer has just said that the company may shift some engine production from the UK to Austria if the UK fails to reach a Brexit deal. It's also, BMW has told Sky News, it will have to consider ending Mini production at its Cowley site in Oxfordshire in the event of a no-deal Brexit, and that the company would not be very happy with a 2 to 3 month Brexit delay. Again, far be it from me to defend Jacob Rees-Mogg, but of course when he appeared on this programme recently, he did concede that the only economist who endorses his views on Brexit is Patrick Minford, and Patrick Minford did tell a House of Commons Select Committee that his vision for Brexit would involve the running down of the automotive and agriculture industries in this country, in the same way he said, as an economist that Margaret Thatcher rather liked, that they'd run down steel and coal. Of course, Rees-Mogg wasn't honest enough to say yes when he was here, but he tried to claim it was out of context or something like that. But at least he admits that's the only economist they've got on side, and he told you this would happen. And all of the people running the big car companies told you that this would happen. But you knew better. Why? Because you were listening to puddings like Digby Jones.
Germany sells 1 million cars a year in Britain. So the first time that this Frenchman who's going to be negotiating for Brussels says, well, we're going to put 10% on tariff on every Jaguar that's sold in Berlin, I sincerely hope that the Brit doing it the other way will say, well, then there's 10% on every BMW sold in Britain. And the moment that happens, and every Audi, and every Mercedes, and every Fiat. So the moment you say, well, I'm sticking a 10% tariff on every Focus that's made in Valencia and sold in Birmingham, I sincerely hope that the boss of Ford, well, I know I'm right, the boss of Ford, the boss of Audi, the boss of Mercedes, straight into Merkel, saying, what are you doing? And I think it'll be zero tariff, not because Britain wants it, but because it's in no one's interest that it doesn't happen.
Funny that, isn't it? Old Digby Jones there, telling us that he knows he's right. BMW just announced that in the event of a no-deal Brexit, is he still shilling for a no-deal Brexit? Is he one of the Brexiters that pretends that he wanted no deal all along, or am I doing him a disservice? I don't know, but I do know that when it comes to what BMW plans to do in the future, you'd be absolutely insane to think that Digby Jones is more trustworthy than the people who run BMW. See also Honda, Toyota, Nissan and Jaguar Land Rover. But I know I'm right. 12:52 is the time. Back to MMR and fake news and my theory that actually the latter is born of the former. Alison's in Crawley Down. Alison, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello,
yeah. When this sort of whole thing really came to the fore was in the sort of mid-90s, and I was school nursing at the time.
Oh, yes.
And there was a big catch-up operation. Don't ask me because I can't remember. It's too long ago and I'm too old. The schedules that, the immunisation schedules that had changed. But basically, we were running a programme where we had to vaccinate every child in the country. And for about a month, all I did was give injections.
Yes.
But it came very much to the fore at that time. And the frustration that professionals felt with the fact that, I can't remember the horrible doctor who was struck off's name?
Andrew Wakefield, the gastroenterologist. You're absolutely right. The Lancet has disowned what he wrote, and he has been struck off the medical register.
Absolutely. At the time, organisations like the BBC and many other news organisations, in the interest of so-called balance, it sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Would give him equal prominence, even though we all knew that in excess of 95% of the medical evidence and medical opinion said what he said was wrong, and that the vaccination was safe and was a good thing to do. And the utter frustration of having to discuss that with parents, because quite naturally, if you hear on the BBC News at 6 o'clock that, if you have this injection, your child could, run a higher risk of developing autism, it's the most natural thing in the world that you're going to worry about that. Why would you not worry about that? You wouldn't be normal if you didn't worry about that. And as I say, the frustration, people used to come and say to me, because they knew my children were of a similar age and were in local schools as well, are you vaccinating your children? And I used to say, I will give you the evidence on which I've based my decision.
But it doesn't matter, does it? Because perceptions, and indeed, it's not critical. It's easy to be sympathetic towards these parents if they turn on their trusted news source and the bloke is being treated with this. It's a bit like Nigel Lawson talking about climate change on the Today programme. You could be forgiven for thinking, well, he's a chancellor. He must be at least in the game. Must be 40% possibly.
And they gave it legs. They properly.
Wasn't just them,
legs.
mate. Wasn't just them, Alison. Which famous former newspaper editor was at the forefront of an anti-MMR campaign?
Oh, well, it has to be Murdoch, I guess.
No, editor, not owner.
Oh, sorry, editor. Oh, well, it'll be Dacre, I guess.
You're absolutely right,
but
Paul Dacre.
And actually, one of the things, do you recall, one of the things a little bit later on that they did with that was Paul Dacre in the Daily Mail went big time after Cherie Blair on this very issue, saying she'd had her children privately vaccinated in
separate
France
vaccines, wasn't it? Yes.
And she refused to say. Now, I don't know whether she did or not.
Doesn't matter.
She's a mother. I can't blame her if she did. She's not a medical expert. She has the same...
No, but she had them vaccinated. I remember that. She just refused to answer whether they'd had the single-dose vaccine, the so-called MMR vaccine. We've moved on from that now into when the kids aren't getting vaccinated at all.
But they've sown the seeds. They've sown the seeds by giving that man equal prominence.
And it sells papers because it's tickets for the ghost train. Everything leads back.
They literally killed children as a result of doing that. And we said that's what they would do at the time. All health professionals that I worked with at the time were saying, this will kill children, and they are just not taking their responsibilities as journalists seriously.
Well, they still don't, do they? Here's a terrifying phrase for you that's just going to ruin your day if it hasn't been ruined already. Because you mentioned Andrew Wakefield, and you're quite right, he was struck off, and he was... the Lancet withdrew the research paper that they originally published. Yeah. But there's a little story about him being on the way back. He settled in Texas. I think he started going out with someone famous. But here is paragraph 3 of a recent report in The Guardian. Are you ready for this, Alison? You sitting down?
Go on, yeah.
It was known he was in Texas with those who shared his views on vaccines and conspiracy, but he was not a public figure until Donald Trump was elected US president.
Oh, boy. Well, that tells you all you need to know about both Donald Trump and Andrew Wakefield.
I'm beginning to worry that I'm turning into a one-trick pony, Alison. I mean, does everything that's wrong in our world somehow lead back to fake news, false equivalence, Donald Trump and Brexit?
Well, to an extent it does. If you stop listening to experts on subjects, I mean, what are we doing? I mean, for goodness sakes, this was a massive... it wasn't a 50-50 issue with the medical profession, and there was massive evidence globally. It's a vaccination that had been given across the planet in various countries on enormous scale. There was an enormous amount of data, and yet they gave equal prominence to Andrew Wakefield. Why?
I do not know, and it has been confirmed by various listeners that somebody who, I suppose I have to describe as a colleague, was all over the Charlie Gard case at Great Ormond Street, using it to pursue whatever weird right-wing agenda the denigration of the NHS is designed to pursue. If you're trying to work out which colleague it was, I'll give you a clue. It wasn't Sheila Fogarty. Alison, thank you very much indeed. That's almost it from me for another day. BMW story, you just wonder where you're going now. But I'll leave you with another little Brexit thought. You remember Suella Braverman? We used to play out the clip of her on Question Time claiming there'd be no divorce bill, that everything would be great, that it was all going to be wonderful. And you'll remember that earlier this week, i.e. yesterday, I pointed out to you that none of them now are claiming things are going to get better. Literally nobody is claiming things are going to be better. The closest you get to, quotes, victory, end quotes, for Brexiters is a claim that things might just about stay the same. April 2016, Michael Gove said, the day after we vote to leave, we hold all the cards and we can choose the path we want. OK? Today, Suella Braverman, née Fernandez, has said, I don't believe it, as in a no-deal Brexit, which, of course, the ERG of which she's a member support. I don't believe it will be Armageddon. Do you think that the referendum might have gone differently if on one side you'd had people saying, well, you know, it's not perfect, but it's better than all the available alternatives, and on the other side you'd had people saying, vote for us, and it might not be Armageddon? 24 days to go.